Hello, I'm Jim Roger, and you're watching The Cutting Edge. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight's show is all about an unsuspecting visitor that's approaching not only our planet, but our solar system. Tonight's show is all about planet Earth being blindsided as Planet X passes by in 2003, question mark. And with us tonight to discuss this is Mark Hazelwood. He's a researcher and an author and a lecturer on this subject. And Mark, I'd like to thank you for appearing here tonight. It is our privilege, believe me, to have you here tonight. Thanks for coming.
It's an honor for me to be here. I really appreciate it. I have a lot of fun doing this.
Okay, well, believe me, it is our privilege. Could you give the audience a thumbnail sketch of your background, how you got started in this field, and what interested you to take this direction?
Well, I really feel I was spiritually guided to do this from youth. I was first exposed to earth change prophecy as a child, Edgar Cayce. And for whatever reason, that sparked an interest over a couple decades, and I perhaps discovered over 100 different intuitives from different places, different times, that all coincided for about a certain timetable and a certain event that should come up. And along the way, I didn't really understand how that would happen, but my interest was there. And then toward the end, things came together. I kind of turned away from prophecy and discovered the science behind Planet X type objects, and specifically one called, well, some of the ancients called it Nibiru, the planet of passing. It's got a regular orbit of 3,600 years, and it's inbound currently.
Very good, very interesting. How close, time-wise, in a time frame, do you think that this planet of passing, the Planet X or Nibiru, is?
Well, you know, I cannot say for sure. I thought I used to be able to. But you see, I believe it's close enough now where it's in the heliosphere and it's broken into its cometary stage. And with the tail, it has tail drag. And any one of these large Planet X type objects with tail drag do not follow regular celestial mechanics. In other words, they'll act like what the ancients used to call as the lawless ones, or cosmic serpents. So the head might surge forward, pause, the tail will catch up. So how to determine, I don't know. I know it's currently inbound. Whether it's a few months or a few short years, I can't say, but that's what I suspect at this time.
So basically we're expecting something that's not following conventional laws of physics or celestial mechanics?
That is true at this time. Any large Planet X type object that breaks into a comet will not follow normal celestial mechanics. That doesn't mean it's going to go all over the place. It's still inbound. It just, trying to come up with a timetable is difficult at best.
I see. So what really is Planet X? Is it a meteor, a comet, an asteroid? What is it most like?
Well, it is large enough to be a planet, and it is a planet. At the same time, when it enters in a heliosphere of a sun, which it is now, it develops a tail. And so at that point, you can call it a large comet. But you could also call it a cross between a celestial star and a planet. So it might be called a brown dwarf. The average solar system has a dwarf in it, and the average solar system has 2 suns. So we're very average. We have a second sun, very few are aware of, that's dark. You can find this out if you were to go to the library, ask for the New Illustrated Science and Invention Encyclopedia between 1987 and 89. Go to volume 30, look under space probes, you'll see a diagram of what Pioneers 10 and 11 found, which is our dark star, our twin sun, which is no hazard to us at all. And then the 10th planet, which is another way to say Planet X, or Roman numeral number 10.
Okay. Very good. Interesting. So you say a dark star, a twin sun. So in other words, are we living in a binary star system here on Earth?
We're in a binary system. Very few are aware of this. The information will slip out, like in publications like I identified, although very few people talk about it. It's sort of suppressed information because it sets the stage too well for this orbit of Planet X, which is supposedly goes back and forth between the 2 suns and takes approximately 3,600 years, like I said.
Interesting. And this comes from the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, their records, is that it?
The Sumerian tablets do discuss the orbital time of Planet X, which they identify as 3,600. It may be closer to 3,700 years. They also name this planet as the 12th planet because they also included the sun and our moon as planets. So it can be called the 10th, the 12th, Nibiru. I have actually discovered 50 different names for this planet. I put 35 in my text, mainly from ancient historical sources who had great respect for it. I mean, some of these old names would be akin to godlike names. celestial Lord Shiva, Comet of Doom, the Destroyer. I mean, they're telling Nemesis. They're telling names. They really
names.
Yeah, they understood the significance of when this thing comes, and consequently the names reflect that.
Okay, so we're talking about something with a 36 or 3,700 year orbital path,
Right.
And so then, are there archaeological records that would support periodic destruction within those time frames, 36, 3,700 years?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I have a section in my text that goes into that. I could have filled my whole book with it, but I decided, you know, I can't just do that. It's not what this is about. So in that section, I go back 14 passages as far as records go. But the most telling evidence is not carbon dating. It is the evidence for the very last passage between 1600 and 1700 BC. And that is from tree rings around the entire globe, so it shows it was a worldwide event, a worldwide pollution event that lasted for decades. In other words, between 1600 to 1700 BC, tree rings from that time were severely narrowed, and not just in, like I said, not just in one area of the world, the entire world. And a mega pollution event like that for decades would not happen unless there was something significant that happened to this planet, like a passing celestial body or Planet X type object, which is what this is.
Oh, okay, very interesting. So there does seem to be periods of past catastrophic destruction. One thing, as you were speaking, that entered my mind was the frozen mammoths in Siberia that were suddenly frozen. Some of these animals were frozen so quickly, they still had fresh vegetation in their mouths and stomachs. And so whatever overtook them was fast, and it was catastrophic, and it was real. Hard science agrees with it. So I suppose that really supports what you're talking about.
Yes, in fact, my research is complemented by a man by the name of James McKinney, and he's got the credentials to back him up and has been studying this subject for some 30 years. He has a book along similar lines called Planet X, Comets, and Earth Changes. And he brings up that when a Planet X type object like this passes, and there's more than one, the Nibiru is just our regular half-brother to the solar system, a rather large electromagnetic wave hits the surface. If it passes within a certain million miles away, a number of million miles away, and that could cause the surface to move similar to the sea. In other words, a tidal wave could go through the crust of the Earth and move it over the core, which would suddenly put the North and South Pole on different places on the crust, and that would take you know, a tropical environment and suddenly throw it into a polar or a very cold environment that would suddenly flash freeze a mammoth or several different animals just like it, and you'd have these records that that show this, and they are there.
Not a good vacation spot. What about evidence of past catastrophic events within our own local solar system? Is there any of that that could be attributed to this?
Well, yes. In fact, Mars has records on its surface that pretend of plasmatic exchange that could happen. In other words, these would be large lightning bolts that would happen through space between any large Planet X type object and another body. In fact, the Grand Canyon may have not been formed by water. It may have been vaporized by one of these large plasmatic exchanges. In fact, last year, one of the moons of, I believe it was Saturn, was etching a groove into the surface of Saturn, and all of us saw it, which was kind of wild. So these canals on Mars could have pretended of a past event that was rather severe. In fact, some of the research from James McKinney would show that Mars may have been a vibrant planet with an atmosphere, but one of these celestial bodies passed by and just sucked the atmosphere right off of it, along with a lot of the water. So severe events can happen without collisions, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, I think that all of mainstream mainline science agrees that the planet Mars at one time had a much heavier atmosphere. It had huge oceans. They're gone now. Maybe they're below the surface, but things radically changed there. Yeah. We have the asteroid belt just beyond planet Mars. Well, they call it the asteroid belt. Maybe it's the remains of Mars, you know.
Well, there could have been remnants of collisions. In other words, when this object comes through, it is the time when the majority of the cratering on the Moon and the Earth and all the other the planets in our solar system happen. In other words, there is a billiard effect that is set up, although it does not run into anything, it passes on by. It brings in an entourage of objects, and there's where you get your possibility of impacts with its entourage of asteroids and other objects it brings with us, too. So just not a pretty scenario.
Drags a whole family of things along with it, so to speak, I guess.
Right. Just last month, what came through? Neat.
Tell us about that.
Okay, well, it was a total media blackout. A large Planet X type object came through our solar system right around the sun. It was as large as Mercury. Like I said, 100% media blackout unless you're looking at Soho on the internet or on a few obscure e-groups like what I have and a few other people have.
Can people at home look this up somewhere?
Oh, sure. They can find out the details of this. But very shortly thereafter, NASA and the what I call the disinformation crew started to try to play this down because they did their best to cover it up. The second the surface lifted off of the sun, a massive coronal mass ejection caused by the plasmatic interchange between this passing object and started going towards this object. The second it hit the object, they shut down Soho for 8 hours trying to cover up what may happen because anything could have happened. This thing, like I said, planet-sized comet could have taken off and just a piece of it could have disrupted Earth. Just passing by Earth, if it would have changed its trajectory, this large solar flare could have affected us severely. So that's why they shut it down. They did not want people to know here, and that's their policy.
Another thing they're doing like that at NASA, from what I understand, is a few years ago, they put the downlink video from the space shuttle to all the Earth feeds on a 45-second delay. I guess they'd had too many UFO encounters or strange objects floating around out there in space, and they decided they wanted to have some censorship of that, I believe. So
yeah, they're all about censorship.
I think they ought to just let us see what's really going on out there.
Well, if you work for any kind of organization like that, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement saying that if you are aware of any sort of inbound object or calamitous event that could possibly come up, you cannot talk about it because you know, the powers that be really want to control a possible panic and keep the financial markets stable as long as possible. You know, they may be getting ready themselves, but they know they don't have the resources to help the public, so they're just kind of letting them go by the wayside.
You know, getting back to the Sumerian stuff, I read a lot of Zechariah Sitchin's material.
That's excellent research.
Yeah, there's not too many more people alive on the planet that can interpret that stuff, I guess. But apparently, you know, 3,500, 3,600 years ago, these people had a very detailed knowledge of the solar system. They knew how many planets we had. They knew how many moons there were around each one of the planets. These people, they were quite advanced. And in just 100 years ago, here on Earth, we started finding these things out in modern science that we knew 3,600 years ago, which I thought was amazing. But there was, or is, detailed information about Nibiru, however you prefer to pronounce it. And so we have some interesting information in the past, but are there many mainstream scientists today taking a real hard, serious look at this now?
Well, there are quite a few who are. There's not too many speaking up, to tell you the truth, because it is a taboo subject to bring up in the major media, and they know it. But there's quite a bit of interest in some of the evidence that is starting to be uncovered, like, some ruins off the coast of Cuba. You know some about this. Tell us what you know. Well,
I know on Linda Howe's website, I think it's earthfiles.com, there's a huge article about some underwater structures that are 2,200 feet down below the surface of the water off the western tip of Cuba. And the way this stuff was discovered, I think originally it was a Canadian company was taking those sound pictures, what do you call them?
Ultrasound, yeah, right.
Yeah, ultrasound photographs of the ocean floor in an oil research study, looking for good places to drill oil, I guess. And they saw all these symmetrical blocks and grid patterns on the ocean's floor, 2,200 feet down. And at one point they lowered a camera down there, and they found a symbol on one of the granite stones. It was an oval, a horizontal oval, and a vertical oval. Well, on the island of Cuba, in the caves, on the walls inside the caves, they're finding that same symbol in the caves up above sea level. So evidently, something catastrophic had to happen at one time to cause the shift, evidently. Well, and that's just one, you know, that's just the one in Cuba.
Right.
But there's other cases off the coast of Japan and Okinawa where they've discovered these pyramid-like structures with turtle carvings, things of that nature, and they're definitely symmetrical, appear to be definitely man-made. And then Graham Hancock and others are involved in some research right now, I think 22 miles out at sea off the coast of India, with a horseshoe formation of an underwater city out there. So what's going on here, folks? I mean, we talk about the legends of Atlantis, too, and things like that. So,
well, to the best of my information, there are ruins off the coast of every major continent all over the world. And we have knowledge of the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. Mm-hmm. And these kind of things would not be there unless great changes happened prior. And they don't happen gradually. They happen overnight. I would suggest, though, that people would look at this from a spiritual standpoint, because this specific passage is going to be accompanied at this time with something wholly different than I feel that any other passage. In other words, we are going through what is known from spiritual sources as an ascension right now, a graduation, if you will. And I don't believe you're going to be able to get away from where you're supposed to be when this event happens. That means you should follow your guidance is what you should do. And some people are not going to have to prepare, and other people should. And so I can't determine what you should do. You got to find that in your heart. You got to feel your own guidance. I feel that somehow, because of the work I've been guided to do, that my family and I will be taken care of. And that could be from a half a dozen situations, but I feel I'm going to be fine. Other people are being guided to build dome homes in the upper Midwest and different areas of the world. And other people feel, that maybe it's their time to go, and they want to ignore the situation. And everyone's got to play out their perfection. There's no wrong or right about how to deal with this. It all boils down to the individual.
Do you think that this is really happening? And if it is, and probably is, for all we know, the FEMA people, or people that normally would handle emergencies, Red Cross, FEMA, or whatever, that might know about this, would want to keep the public calmed down about this?
Well, it's interesting you brought up FEMA, because their budget has suddenly doubled for fiscal 2003, from $3.3 billion to $6.6 billion. And they've been given an order as of late, which is kind of interesting. They've been told that they want to, they have to learn how to evacuate every major city in the United States. What for? Well, the first thing they say is under the guise of terrorism, but if you look into the fine print, they give a whole long list of earth change type situations that they're getting ready for, earthquakes.
That's actually part of their criteria?
Oh, absolutely part of what they need to be doing right now. It is written in stone. It is an order that's been given. And it's interesting to look at, that they're being given something that I don't think they're being told the whole story about. But they're given a lot more money to do this. And what they do with it and how they use it, who knows, and how it exactly plays out is kind of interesting. On the other hand, I hear there are plans, the opposite plans may be in effect, depending on the situation. They may decide, I've heard, to blow up bridges so certain cities you can't evacuate. You're going to be basically caught up in a chaos. So how they handle what city and when and how it plays out, who knows?
Okay. So then, do you think there would be a disinformation campaign going on to keep people off the main track of things?
Well, absolutely. In order to stave off panic and financial collapse, the powers that be have hired thousands of people within the CIA and other organizations to counter this information, to go after anyone, including myself's character, and try to attack them in any way, shape, or form that they can, to get people to turn away from this. But you know, since this is happening during an ascension process, I think some of this stuff may be backfiring on people. In other words, if you were being guided to this information, if all of a sudden you hear, okay, Planet X is not real from somebody, all of a sudden it may just jog a memory in you. What is Planet X? It may just get you curious enough to actually research and find out the reality of this, and find the people that have got the scientific credentials, like James McKinney that I'm working with, and find out the reality of this situation. So yes, the disinformation campaign's in place. No, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I accept it as part of, I guess, God's ultimate plan. That somewhere in between with the people that are talking about this and trying to get it out, and the people that are trying to suppress it, by the end, it'll equalize itself and play it out exactly the way it should. So it's part of the, each side has got their role to play, and I can't say, that they both aren't needed for a number of different reasons. Now, if suddenly the powers that be decide to reveal this situation all of a sudden to the world, perhaps it would cause panic and financial collapse. Would I want that? No, but that's not the way this is being handled. So, you know, I can go forward with what I'm doing and feel free to do my best to get this information out and not worry, because of the other side's disinformation campaign.
Interesting. You know, I've heard other people talking about this same subject, and I've heard them say that qualified people, astronomers interested in this particular subject, who were trying to get telescope time on certain telescopes around the world, were accepted and it was okay. And then the moment that the operators of the telescopes found out what they wanted to do, sorry, we're closed. You'll have to go look somewhere else.
Yeah,
Do you know anything?
Oh, geez, I've heard that. I've heard this for, I don't know, well over a year, that all the major telescopes are tied up and you can't get any time. And some of the stories are pretty ridiculous and repetitive. And some of these scopes are just being destroyed. They're allowed to be burnt up in fires where they could have easily spent, you know, a few $1,000s to protect, you know, a $20 million investment, and they're just not doing it. They're allowing them to, you know, a few of them to be destroyed. So. Yeah, it is part of the situation. If people were to research this, they'll see the reality of that and a lot more. I mean, any time there's a large Planet X type object entering to the solar system, there's a plasmatic exchange with the sun. It causes the sun to start going bonkers. In other words, start discharging the surface and causing lots of solar flares. We've had a regular 11.5-year solar cycle now go on and on, decade after decade. Suddenly, this cycle won't end. It's supposed to end the solar maximum 99-2000. We're supposed to be at an absolute solar minimum now. The amount of solar activity is at an all-time high right now.
I know that. I'm a ham radio operator, and I know the bands, the long-distance bands are still wide open, and they should be closed. It should be very difficult to use those bands right now, and the sunspot activity enhances that.
It's off the scale. I mean, it's affecting our weather. In fact, all this so-called global warming that you're hearing about has all to do with the amount of electricity and protons that are coming from the sun affecting our jet streams and changing our weather. Our dirty little civilization puts out about as much hydrocarbons as one volcano going off at one time. We're not affecting the weather. So you don't buy into that global warming caused by us scenario. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't clean up our act and that pollution isn't wrong. We're not causing the changes that has gone on acutely since 1995 in the weather. It is all the result of this inbound planet and the solar flaring, the excess in solar flaring.
You know, you mentioned something a minute ago about the, I guess, the electromagnetic effects as this thing approaches.
Okay.
Are you referring to something like, for example, when you walk across a carpet and touch the doorknob, zap? You know, is that the differently charged spheres coming in contact with each other? Is it sort of like that? Or?
Well, the universe is 99% plasma. It conducts electricity, which is totally against the normal knowledge in the astronomical community. Although now, you know, there are a lot of scientists that are coming around and they recognize the electrical nature of the universe. We have electrical fields, and we're connected being this close. I think within 15 feet of any individual, your electrical fields start to mesh. It's the same way with the planets, except for it's a lot larger and it goes out a lot farther.
Magnetosphere, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the planets are very much like people in that respect. There's the electrical interchange that is happening between them and between us, and it's all very similar.
You know, not to go too far off the track here, one of the first things you learn in with electricity is there's a current and voltage, and the magnetic field they're all opposite each other. And anytime you cut the lines of magnetic flux or a magnetic field, anytime you bring anything perpendicular through those visible lines of magnetic flux, you generate an electric current.
Correct.
And if you remember the tethered satellite
a
few years
Jesus.
ago.
McKinney told NASA, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that.
It's one of the most basic lessons of electricity.
They almost lost the shuttle doing that.
They lost 2 of their 3 navigational computers. They almost didn't get home. But what they were doing is they were dragging, I think it was, 13 miles long, the tether, through the magnetic lines of flux, generating a current as they go along. I think what they did discover is a new way of generating electricity out in space when you're in the vicinity of a planet.
Well, you know, James McKinney is a very dynamic scientist, and he can explain, you know, what he knows to your triple doctor as well as the layman. And what he says, the sun basically works as a battery. It has a capacitor around it, in other words, the solar field. And it works very much like a backyard bug zapper. Whenever a fly comes in to that solar field, it discharges the capacitor, and it causes the bug to get killed, the electric current. Same way, a small comet coming through will discharge the capacitor, small solar flare will happen. When a large object comes in, it doesn't have to get very close, and it starts to discharge the entire surface of the sun on a regular basis. That's what's happening now. these large solar flares are coming off. And you know what? It's changing us genetically. It's changing all the plants on this and animals on this on Earth. And you know, Earth is not even being singled out. I mean, all the planets are changing here. The luminosity values of all the planets are increasing here in the solar system. The moon has actually developed an atmosphere about 6,000 feet of what they call natrium. The poles on Mars are melting. There's been a 40 to 50% magnetic polar shift already on the outer planets, the largest ones. So it's not just Earth. The global warming is a joke. To try to blame our little civilization, all this happening in the solar system all at once is a real joke. Now this is suppressed information that actually came from a Dr. Dimitrov who used to work with James McKinney, but the powers that be did their best to cut the lines of communication off between them, because he's in Russia and James McKinney's over here. But some of his research slipped out. One of the things that he showed, a real intricate study between